If you ever drive north along Route 89 at dusk, you might notice a sliver of light stretching over the Montana hills, the kind that melts the horizon into the gold and lavender. That's where Emma Callahan lived, at the edge of a small, quietly grieving town. Her family's ranch sat alone, hugged by fields that grew wild with purple asters, golden grasses, and the faint scent of pine, a place that had always felt too big for the three of them. And now, with her mother gone, it felt impossibly vast. Emma was 14 that summer, but she didn't feel 14. Some mornings she felt ancient, as if her heart had folded in on itself and dried up like an autumn leaf. Other days she was just numb, drifting between memories, her father's cold silences and the silent rhythm of chores that filled each day. Every surface in the old house seemed to echo with her mother's laugh or the scrape of her boots at the door. Now there was only the hollow tap of Emma's own footsteps and the occasional rumble of her father's voice, never soft, never inviting. On the day everything changed, the sky was stretching toward September. A dry, restless wind swept across the hills. Emma had just finished gathering eggs in the dim orange haze of evening, her hands sore from pulling wire on a sagging fence. When she turned back toward the house, she saw her father standing on the porch, arms crossed, jaw set, staring out at the hills as if daring the world to challenge him. She didn't bother to wave. She set the basket on the rail and wandered down the old cattle path instead, boots raising puffs of dust that shimmered in the dying light. The town, Edgewater, was only 3 miles away, but it felt like a different universe. People there still nodded politely at Emma, but their eyes slid away, always searching for the right thing to say, or not say to the girl whose mother had died so suddenly. They spoke in whispers when she passed, the grief still raw and awkward for everyone. Even her best friend, Sadie, had grown distant, unsure whether to mention her mother or pretend the Callahans had always been just two. So Emma kept to herself, her world shrinking to the old barn, the dusty trails, and the broad sky overhead. She reached the far end of their property, a place where the fences gave way to wild sage and tangled shrubs. Beyond, the ridge rose up, a lonely silhouette against the fading light. As she crested the first low hill, she paused, feeling that familiar prickle on her skin. It wasn't just the wind, it was the sense that she was being watched. She had felt it before, especially in the evenings. Sometimes, as she worked in the fields, she would catch the flash of something pale moving in the shadows, swift and silent. Tonight the air was still, and Emma stood perfectly motionless, listening. That's when she saw it, a ghostly shape lingering between the twisted junipers, maybe 50 yards away. At first, it could have been a trick of the twilight, a patch of fog, a piece of bleached wood, or her own exhausted imagination. But as she squinted, the shape shifted, ears, a muzzle, a mane so pale it glowed silver, rippling when the wind caught it. The horse stood stock still, its body half concealed behind the brush, but its eyes burned bright, reflecting the last of the sun. Emma felt her heart stutter. She remembered the stories, the ones whispered by ranch hands late at night and carried by school kids at the bus stop. That's the ghost horse. Bad luck. Don't look it in the eye, or you'll have nightmares for a week. Some said the animal had brought down fire and ruin. Others said it was the restless spirit of an outlaw's steed, doomed to wander until someone brave enough dared break the curse. Adults always laughed, until a storm broke the fence or a foal was born lame. Then they'd mutter about omens, always with one eye on the ridge. Emma stared. The horse stared back. The distance between them felt charged, like the silence after thunder before the rain falls. For a long moment neither of them moved. Emma's fingers curled into the worn hem of her shirt. The air buzzed with fear and something else, a pull she didn't understand, as if this animal carried the last piece of her mother's spirit. It was a ridiculous thought, but it stuck. She couldn't look away. Just then, a shout carried from the house, her father's voice gruff and impatient. "Emma, dinner." The spell snapped. The pale horse flicked its ears, then turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving nothing but a faint, silvery trail of dust. Emma stood rooted to the spot, breathing hard, heart racing. The wind shifted again, tugging at her hair, bringing the scent of rain and far-off smoke. She lingered a moment longer, staring into the darkness where the horse had stood. Something inside her ached, but she didn't know why. She told herself it was just a horse, probably a stray owl. Maybe it belonged to the Johnsons up the road, or maybe it was another one of those wild Mustangs that drifted down from the mountains in the fall. But she knew better. The look in its eyes wasn't wild. It was haunted, searching, full of secrets she could almost touch if she just dared to get closer. When she finally trudged back to the house, her father barely looked up from his plate. The kitchen was bright with harsh overhead light, the walls hung with faded photos, her mother's face smiling out from every corner. Emma slid into her seat and poked at her food, her mind still back on the ridge, replaying the moment again and again. Her father's fork clattered against his plate. He cleared his throat. "You get the eggs?" Emma nodded. "Yeah." Silence fell. Somewhere outside, a coyote called. The wind rattled the window pane. Her father stared at his hands, lost in thoughts he would never share. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and stiff. "You stay away from the hills after dark. You hear me?" Emma met his eyes. "Why?" He hesitated, jaw working. "It's not safe up there." "Animals. Holes? You hear stories. I don't want you wandering off." She almost said something about the horse. Instead, she nodded, swallowing the urge to push back. There was no point, not tonight, not with the shadow of her mother still thick between them. After dinner, Emma sat on the back steps, knees drawn to her chest, listening to the quiet. She watched the stars pop out, one by one, until the night was deep and silent. Somewhere out on the ridge, the silver horse waited. She could feel it, a presence in the darkness, calling to something in her she hadn't known was missing. She closed her eyes, letting the ache in her chest spread until it filled her whole body. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow, she'd go back. She'd find the horse. She'd find out why it felt like the only living thing in the world that could understand what it meant to be lost. And as she drifted off to sleep, Emma dreamed. Not of her mother, but of hooves pounding across moonlit grass, and a voice in the wind whispering her name. In the days that followed her first encounter with the ghost horse, Emma moved through her world like a shadow. She woke up to the pale light filtering through faded curtains, the smell of black coffee and dust in the kitchen, and the quiet shuffle of her father's boots across creaking floorboards. Everything in the house seemed muffled, as if even the walls understood that speaking too loudly would be an offense to the silence her mother left behind. Mornings started the same. Her father eating toast at the counter, radio low, eyes scanning the local news without really reading. Emma, usually a chatterbox, now barely said a word. She missed the sound of her own voice laughing. She missed her mother's easy jokes, the ways she could turn even the simplest chore into a game. Her father had grown harder, less patient, every line on his face deepening, his hands always busy, fixing, repairing, mending, but never reaching out to her. Their conversations were brief, functional, full of instructions and warnings, but rarely warmth. She tried once to ask about her mother, about the old days, or the stories she used to tell about wild horses and starry skies. Jack's face tightened and he looked away, jaw clenching. "Best let the past be, Em," he said gruffly, and the topic was closed. The walls between them grew higher. At school, things weren't much better. Word had spread that Emma had been seen standing out on the ridge, talking to herself. Or so the rumors went. Kids glanced at her, whispered in huddles, and avoided her eyes. Sadie, her old friend, seemed torn between reaching out and retreating. Emma felt like she was fading into the background, invisible except for the weight of her grief, which everyone seemed to tiptoe around but never address. The townspeople, always quick to offer advice and warnings, had begun to talk, too. At the hardware store, Mr. Grant gave her a wary glance as she bought a bag of feed. You best stay away from that ridge, Emma. Nothing but trouble up there. At the diner, Mrs. Lopez leaned over the counter. Voice low. Folks say, the ghost horse brings bad luck. Sweetheart, don't go chasing after shadows. But Emma felt an ache in her chest every time someone mentioned the horse. The image of its pale mane shimmering in the dusk haunted her. She would catch herself staring out the window during class, sketching horses in the margins of her notebook, always with wild eyes and flowing silver hair. She didn't tell anyone about the feeling that pulled her toward the hills, a feeling so strong it sometimes hurt. One afternoon, after a particularly long, lonely day at school, Emma decided she couldn't stay cooped up any longer. The sky was streaked with heavy clouds, the air thick with the smell of approaching rain. But she didn't care. She finished her chores quickly, ignoring her father's questioning glance, and slipped out the back door, jacket slung over her shoulder. She told herself she'd only go as far as the old fence, just a walk, just some fresh air. But as her boots crunched along the gravel path, she found herself drawn farther and farther, her heart thumping in anticipation. She thought of the horse, the way it had watched her, not with wildness, but with something almost human in its gaze. She wondered if it remembered her mother, if it knew her voice, her scent, her gentle hands. The idea was ridiculous, and yet, halfway up the ridge, Emma paused to catch her breath, wiping sweat from her brow. The landscape spread out below her, fields dotted with cows, the distant river glinting in the last shards of sunlight. The tiny dots of the town clustered near the main road. She felt small and enormous at the same time, as if she could swallow the world and still be empty. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted movement. There, at the edge of the trees, stood the ghost horse. It was even more beautiful than she remembered. Tall and lean, with muscles rippling beneath its silver gray, coat, mane, and tail streaming like water. Its eyes met hers across the distance, and Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She wanted to call out, but her voice stuck. Instead, she simply stood, letting the silence stretch between them. The horse didn't run. It didn't snort or toss its head. It just watched her, as if waiting for something. A sudden gust of wind whipped around her, carrying the first drops of rain. Emma hesitated, glancing back toward the ranch. She knew her father would worry if she didn't return soon, but the pull was too strong. She took a step forward, then another, moving slowly, deliberately. The horse tensed but didn't flee. She reached the fence and stopped, heart hammering. "Hey there," she whispered, unsure why she felt the need to speak so softly, as if afraid the wrong word might shatter the fragile moment. "I won't hurt you. I promise." The words felt strange, almost sacred in the gathering dusk. For a few moments nothing happened. The rain picked up, drumming softly on the brim of her hat. The horse shifted its weight, ears flicking. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out an apple, an old habit from when her mother had taught her to feed the barn horses. She held it out, hand trembling. The horse took a hesitant step forward, nostrils flaring, testing the air. Emma's breath caught. "Come on," she coaxed. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The words felt like a prayer. Suddenly, a shout echoed from behind her. Her father's voice carried on the wind. "Emma, get back here. Now!" The horse whinnied, startled, and bolted, disappearing into the trees in a blur of silver. Emma felt a surge of frustration and disappointment, tears stinging her eyes. She turned, trudging back down the hill, the apple still clenched in her hand. That night, as thunder rattled the windows and rain hammered the roof, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the memory of the horse's eyes, or the feeling that somehow they were connected. By her mother, by loss, by something she didn't have words for yet. Her father checked on her once, pausing in the doorway, but said nothing. She pretended to sleep. In the morning, The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and bright, but the ache in Emma's chest remained. She went through the motions, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, sweeping the barn, but her mind was elsewhere. She had to see the horse again. She had to know if the stories were true, if the animal was really cursed, or if it was, like her, simply misunderstood. At breakfast, Jack barely glanced at her. "Stay away from that ridge, Em," he muttered, not looking up from his coffee. She nodded, but inside, a spark of rebellion flared. If anything, his warnings only made her more determined. That afternoon, after school, she gathered a handful of apples and tucked them into her backpack. She waited until her father was busy repairing a broken gate, then slipped away, heart pounding. The sky was clear, the air sharp and electric. She hurried up the path, eyes scanning the horizon. At the top of the ridge, she found hoofprints in the mud, fresh, clear, unmistakable. Her heart soared. She followed the trail, moving quietly, careful not to spook the animal. As she rounded a bend, she saw the horse grazing in a patch of wildflowers, its silver coat gleaming in the sunlight. Emma smiled, hope swelling in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid. Not of the horse, not of the stories, not even of her own grief. For the first time in months, she felt alive. And somewhere, just out of sight, the ghost horse lifted its head, ears pricked, as if sensing the start of something new. On the surface, Emma's days looked the same as ever. Routine chores, quiet dinners, long hours spent either in her room or wandering the open hills. But inside, everything was shifting. Each time she glimpsed the ghostly horse on the ridge, her curiosity burned brighter. What was it about that animal? Why did it make her feel close to her mother, even though she was gone? The questions pressed in on Emma until she couldn't ignore them anymore. That Friday afternoon, the ranch felt especially silent. Jack had driven into town early to get supplies, and the farmhands were off fixing a fence line on the far side of the property. Emma stood in the hallway, staring at the narrow pull-down ladder to the attic, heart thudding in her chest. Her mother had always told her, "Some secrets in this house are best left for rainy days." Today, the sky was cloudless, but Emma felt a storm brewing inside her. She climbed the ladder slowly, the wooden rungs creaking beneath her weight. The attic smelled of dust and cedar, a place lost in time. Thin beams of sunlight filtered through tiny windows, illuminating trunks and boxes stacked along the walls. Emma hesitated, then crossed to the oldest trunk, a battered green chest covered in faded stickers from rodeos and horse shows. She'd seen her mother pack it away the winter before she died. With trembling fingers, Emma unclipped the rusty latch and lifted the lid. Inside, she found a mess of old photographs, some curled at the edges, others still sharp and bright. There were ribbons and show numbers, yellowed newspaper clippings about local events, and at the very bottom, a stack of envelopes tied together with blue ribbon. Emma pulled out a photo and stared at it. Her mother, years younger, hair wild under a battered cowboy hat, standing next to a tall, silver-gray horse. The horse's head rested on her mother's shoulder, their eyes both soft and wise. Emma's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. The horse in the photo was the ghost horse from the ridge. Her hands shook as she shuffled through more pictures. Her mother, riding the horse across a sunlit meadow, laughing, brushing its mane, teaching it tricks with a gentle touch. In every photo, the bond between them was obvious, a kind of secret language shared between girl and animal. She untied the bundle of letters, careful not to tear the fragile paper. They were addressed to the county authorities, written in her mother's sloping hand. Emma began to read. To whom it may concern, I am writing once again to plea for your understanding regarding the mare known as Solace. Solace. Emma said the name aloud, letting it settle on her tongue. It sounded both strong and sad, a word that fit the mysterious horse perfectly. She kept reading, eyes stinging with tears, as her mother's desperation leapt from the page. She's not dangerous. She is misunderstood. She saved my life once. Please don't send her away. The wild does not suit her. She's known love, trust, and she will not find them out there alone. There were more letters, some angrier, some pleading, all ending with her mother's signature. Emma's chest tightened. She imagined her mother, standing before a cold-faced council, fighting for an animal everyone else had decided was cursed, and losing. At the bottom of the trunk, Emma found a small notebook. Inside were training notes, memories, and sketches, some of Solace, some of Emma as a baby, all rendered in quick, loving strokes. Her mother had written about teaching Solace to bow, to come when called, to trust in kindness rather than fear. There were stories of long rides through moonlit fields, of thunderstorms weathered together in the barn, of quiet moments when grief or fear seemed far away. Emma wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the flood of memories that weren't her own, but suddenly felt like part of her. She realized now why the horse seemed familiar. Solace had been part of her childhood, even if she couldn't quite remember the details. Maybe, deep down, the animal remembered her, too. A loud slam from downstairs jolted Emma from her reverie. Jack's voice echoed up the stairs. "Emma? Where are you?" She quickly stuffed the photos and letters back into the trunk, leaving the notebook tucked under her arm. She climbed down, heart still racing. Jack was waiting at the bottom, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "I told you, I don't like you messing around up there. Too much junk, too many memories." His voice softened, just for a moment. Hey, let's just let the past be, all right?" Emma hesitated, clutching the notebook. Did Mom really train the ghost horse?" she asked, voice small but steady. Jack's eyes flickered with something, pain, regret, maybe even fear. "She did," he admitted quietly. "She loved that horse. Too much, some folks said, caused trouble for us, more than you know." Emma wanted to ask more, but Jack's jaw had set again, the shutters coming down over his eyes. He walked away, leaving Emma alone in the hallway. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She pored over the notebook by flashlight, reading her mother's words over and over. It felt like a lifeline, a way to connect with the woman she missed so much. She began to understand. Solace wasn't a curse. She was a survivor, just like Emma, driven out and left alone by people who didn't bother to understand. The next day, Emma woke before dawn, driven by a fierce new purpose. She packed apples, the notebook, and a handful of sugar cubes into her backpack. She didn't bother telling Jack. She knew what he'd say. The grass was wet with dew as she made her way toward the ridge, heart pounding. This time, when she reached the clearing, Solace was waiting. The horse lifted her head, ears pricked, as if she'd been expecting Emma all along. Emma approached slowly, murmuring the words she'd found in her mother's notes. Soft, gentle, familiar. Solace didn't run. She stepped forward, nostrils quivering, and touched her nose to Emma's outstretched hand. Emma choked back a sob, running her fingers through the horse's silken mane. "You knew her, didn't you?" she whispered. For the first time since her mother's death, Emma felt something warm break open inside her. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The past wasn't something to hide from. It was something to carry forward, like a torch against the darkness. And as the sun rose, painting the sky in gold and pink, Emma and Solace stood together on the ridge. Two shadows, side by side, ready to face whatever the world might throw at them next. The next morning, the Montana sky was endless and sharp, brushed with streaks of pink and orange as the sun crested the horizon. Emma barely noticed. She barely slept, mind whirring with the images and stories she'd uncovered in the attic. All night, she'd replayed her mother's words, the gentle tone in the notebook, the sketches of Solace. She clung to those scraps of memory like life rafts, refusing to let them sink into the darkness that so often threatened to swallow her whole. She moved quickly, quietly, grabbing a faded canvas backpack and slipping in a handful of apples, sugar cubes, and the precious notebook. She scrawled a note to her father. Going for a walk, back before lunch, knowing he'd be out in the east pasture for most of the morning, mending fences. The air was crisp as she stepped outside, her breath fogging slightly, the grass sparkling with dew. Every sound seemed sharper, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As Emma made her way up the familiar ridge trail, the sense of anticipation grew stronger. She rehearsed what she'd say if she found the horse, whispering lines from her mother's notes. "It's all about patience, Em. Quiet, steady movements. Horses trust what they know, not what they're told." Those words looped in her mind, a fragile thread connecting her to a woman she still longed to see standing at the kitchen counter, humming softly over a mug of tea. When she reached the clearing, her heart leaped. There, grazing in the long grass, stood Solace. The horse's silvery coat gleamed in the morning sun, almost ethereal. Solace lifted her head, ears flicking in Emma's direction. The air buzzed with electricity, fear, excitement, and something else, something that felt like hope. Emma swallowed her nerves, took a slow step forward. "Hey, girl," she called softly, trying to keep her voice steady, gentle, as her mother had described. She pulled an apple from her bag, holding it out with an open palm, careful not to make any sudden movements. The horse watched her, cautious but not afraid, nostrils flaring as she caught Emma's scent on the breeze. For a long moment nothing happened. Emma felt her hand tremble, but she held still, whispering nonsense words, soothing, steady, filling the silence with gentle music. Solace edged closer, one slow step at a time, her muscles tense but not ready to bolt. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she thought the horse must hear it too. Then, finally, Solace's warm breath brushed across Emma's fingers. The horse nosed the apple, lips gently picking it from Emma's palm. Emma let out the breath she'd been holding, her eyes filling with tears. The connection was undeniable, electric. She stroked Solace's neck, fingers sinking into the silken mane. The horse tensed for a moment, then relaxed, pressing her head softly against Emma's chest. "I knew you'd remember," Emma whispered, her voice catching. "You knew her, didn't you? You remember my mom." The tears spilled over, hot and unbidden, soaking into Solace's mane. For the first time in months, Emma felt something shift inside her. A door opening, light flooding into a room she thought would stay dark forever. She stood there for a long time, simply breathing, listening to the slow, steady heartbeat beneath Solace's glossy coat. She remembered more lines from the notebook. "Let her get used to you. Talk to her. Let her smell you. Horses know people by their scent, by their calmness. They can feel your heart." Emma spoke softly, telling Solace about her mother, about the lonely days and the silent dinners, about the ache that wouldn't go away. Slowly, Solace grew bolder. She nibbled another apple, then allowed Emma to stroke her nose, her ears, the white star-shaped mark in the middle of her forehead. Emma laughed through her tears, feeling lighter than she had in a long, long time. For a moment, the rest of the world faded away. No chores, no school, no wary glances from neighbors or sharp words from her father. Just a girl and a horse, two lost souls who had somehow found each other again. But the spell wasn't unbreakable. A sudden snap from the woods, the cracks of a fallen branch, sent a jolt through Solace. The horse shied, backing up a few steps, muscles tense and ready to flee. Emma froze, remembering her mother's warnings. "Don't grab at her. Don't force it. Let her come to you. Trust her instincts, and she'll trust you back." She crouched down, making herself small, her hands open and empty. "It's okay, girl," she murmured. "It's just a deer, probably. Or a squirrel. I won't hurt you. I promise." She waited, holding her breath, willing the horse to stay. Solace hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, curiosity overcoming fear. Emma felt a thrill of pride. Her mother would have been proud too. She offered another sugar cube, letting Solace lick it from her palm, savoring the moment of quiet connection. When the sun rose higher, painting the meadow gold, Emma finally stood up. "I have to go now," she told Solace, stroking her nose one last time. "But I'll be back. I promise." "Yeah," the horse nickered softly, almost as if she understood. Emma smiled, her heart full. She made her way back down the ridge, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand, every step lighter than the one before. She couldn't wait to write about what had happened, to capture every detail before it slipped away like a dream. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt like she had a purpose, a secret worth keeping. At home, she slipped inside quietly, hoping to avoid her father's questions. But Jack was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, suspicion in his eyes. "You're back late," he said gruffly. "Where were you?" Emma hesitated, heart pounding. Should she tell him? Would he understand? She decided, for now, to keep her secret. "I'm just walking," she lied, sliding past him to the sink. She could feel his gaze on her back, heavy and searching, but he didn't press further. That afternoon, Emma returned to her chores with a new sense of determination. She practiced the routines from her mother's notebook, whispering to the barn horses, mimicking the signals and sounds she'd used with Solace. She wanted to be ready, ready for whatever might come next, ready to prove to everyone, including herself, that she was her mother's daughter. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of fire and rose, Emma stood at her bedroom window, watching the ridge. She could just make out a pale, silvery shape moving through the grass, wild and free. She pressed her palm to the glass, a silent promise hanging between them. Tomorrow she'd go back. Tomorrow she'd be brave again. And somewhere, out there, beneath the vast, endless sky, a horse waited. No longer just a shadow, but a friend. A partner? A second chance at the kind of love that heals old wounds and brings the world back to life. The days that followed Emma's first true contact with Solace were some of the most electric of her life. Every morning she'd rise before dawn, slipping quietly from the house, heart thumping with hope and fear in equal measure. She learned to move silently, to blend into the hush of the waking world. She and Solace meeting at the ridge, in the soft glow of early light, where the horse seemed less a spirit and more a living echo of all Emma had lost and found. At first their bond was cautious. Emma would sit in the grass, reading softly from her mother's notebook, offering apples or sugar cubes, letting Solace grow accustomed to her scent, her voice, her rhythms. Each day, the horse came closer, ears flicking at Emma's stories, muscles slowly unwinding. Soon, Emma was able to brush Solace's mane, trace the star-shaped marking on her forehead, even teach her simple signals. Step forward, step back, lower your head. The very cues her mother once wrote about. There was something miraculous in watching Solace respond, a flick of the ear, a slow blink, the quiet trust of a wild creature who had every reason to run. But joy in secret was never meant to last. One afternoon, as Emma returned from the ridge, jeans grass-stained, cheeks flushed with excitement, she found her father waiting in the barn, face like thunder. "Where have you been?" Jack's voice was hard, but beneath it ran a current of worry that Emma almost mistook for anger. "You been sneaking off again?" Emma tried to keep her voice steady. "Just walking, needed air." Jack's jaw clenched. "That's not what I asked. You been up on the ridge?" Emma hesitated, weighing the risks. Lying was easier, but the guilt gnawed at her. She decided on half-truths, sometimes. "It's peaceful out there." Jack glared at her, hands on hips. "You know that horse is still out there. Folks have seen it. If I catch you near that animal, you'll be grounded, Emma. That's final." A flush of frustration burned in her chest. "Why?" "She's not dangerous, Dad." "Mom, don't." Jack cut her off sharply, voice like a slap. "Your mother nearly lost everything for that horse. Got herself in trouble with half the county. We don't need more trouble. You hear me?" Emma bit her tongue, 1,000 arguments fighting to break free, but Jack was already walking away, shoulders tense, the door slamming behind him. Emma pressed her fists to her sides, blinking away hot tears. She wanted to scream, at her father, at the world, at the stubborn grief that made everything so hard, but she didn't. Instead, she waited until Jack was busy, mending a tractor, on the phone with suppliers, talking to the neighbor about a sick calf. Then she snuck out again, drawn to Solace by something she couldn't explain or control. If anything, the secrecy made their meetings more precious. Each stolen hour with Solace felt like a rebellion, a way to keep her mother's memory alive, to push back against the suffocating sadness at home. Emma taught Solace more commands, following the routines from the notebook, circling in the grass, lowering her head on cue, even coming when Emma whistled softly. The horse learned quickly, eyes bright with curiosity, the old wariness slowly replaced by something new. It's trust. But secrecy had its costs. One day, as Emma was leading Solace through a series of gentle turns, she heard laughter behind her. Spinning, she spotted Jake Miller, the local mechanic's son, a year older, always with a cruel joke at the ready, leaning against his dirt bike, smirking. "Look at you," Jake called out, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Playing ghost whisperer, huh? My old man says that horse is cursed. You gonna get yourself killed." Emma's cheeks flamed, but she stood her ground. "You don't know anything about her. She's not dangerous." Jake rolled his eyes. "Tell that to the town council. Word is, they're planning to catch that horse and put her down. Too many complaints. Livestock spooked. Fences busted. Nobody wants her here." Fear stabbed through Emma. "She hasn't hurt anyone." Jake shrugged, unbothered. "Doesn't matter. People believe what they want to believe." "You better watch it, Emma. My dad says your family's already in enough trouble." With that, he revved his engine and sped off, the sound echoing through the hills, sending Solace skittering away in alarm. Emma's hands shook. The thought of losing Solace, again, was unbearable. That evening, she confronted her father, voice trembling with fury. "They're going to try to catch her, Dad. The council, everyone's against her. But she's not bad. I swear it." Jack's face softened for a fraction of a second, the old grief flickering in his eyes. "It doesn't matter what she is, Emma. People make up their minds, and that's that. I lost your mother fighting for that horse. I won't lose you, too." Emma wanted to argue, to plead, but exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket. She retreated to her room, clutching the notebook, heart aching. She wrote for hours, pouring her hopes and fears onto the page, sketching Solace's kind eyes, her mother's smile, the ridge bathed in golden light. For days, Emma and Solace met in secret, their routines growing more confident. Emma began dreaming of a day when she could show everyone what Solace could do, how gentle and smart she was, how she'd saved Emma's life in ways no one else could see. She practiced commands, tried new tricks, sometimes even singing softly as Solace grazed. Those moments became Emma's sanctuary, the only place she truly felt safe, understood. But the outside world crept in, relentless. At the grocery store, she overheard Mrs. Grant muttering, "That Callahan girl's just like her mother, always running wild." At school, Jake and his friends made ghost noises behind her back, tossing paper horses across her desk. One afternoon, as Emma walked home, Sadie finally caught up with her, breathless and hesitant. I heard about the town meeting. My dad says they're going to do it, hire someone to trap the horse. I just thought you should know." Emma's heart raced. "Thanks, Sadie." She tried to smile, but it came out crooked, her throat tight with dread. She knew what she had to do. That night, she left a note for her father. "Don't worry, I'll be safe, I promise." Then she crept out under the cover of darkness, the moon lighting her path as she hurried toward the ridge. Solace was waiting, her eyes wide and trusting in the silver light. Emma pressed her forehead to the horses, whispering, "No matter what happens, I won't let them hurt you. We'll find a way. Together." As the wind rustled through the grass and the distant lights of town glimmered on the horizon, Emma made her own silent vow to protect Solace, to honor her mother's memory, to fight for what was right, even if the whole world seemed determined to stand in her way. And high above, the stars watched in silence, bearing witness to a new chapter of courage, loyalty, and hope, one that would change everything, whether Emma was ready or not. The tension in Edgewater was like a taut wire stretched across the valley, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Emma felt it everywhere, in the way people watched her at the feed store, the way whispers followed her down Main Street, and especially in the way her father grew quieter, more withdrawn. Every time the subject of the ghost horse came up, it was as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. It started with the rumors. Mrs. Grant from the post office claimed she'd seen the silver horse near her garden at dusk, and that her chickens hadn't laid eggs in days. Old Mr. Parker at the gas station swore he lost 2 calves after catching a glimpse of that cursed animal up on the ridge. And Jake Miller, never one to miss a chance at drama, told anyone who'd listen that he'd nearly been trampled by the ghost horse. Never mind that he'd been the one revving his dirt bike in the field. By the end of the week, the whole town was talking. The story grew with every telling. Now, the ghost horse wasn't just unlucky. It was dangerous. It had bad blood. It carried storms. It could lead children astray. Even folks who had once scoffed at such talk began to look at Emma with suspicion, as if her connection to Solace made her different, maybe even cursed herself. Emma felt the weight of their judgment everywhere she went. At school, kids snickered behind their hands, whispering about horse witches and haunted hills. Teachers watched her with wary eyes, as if expecting her to cause trouble. Even Sadie, her once best friend, seemed distant, caught between wanting to help and fearing what others might say. At home, things were no better. Jack, worn thin by worry and grief, had started drinking his coffee black and strong, his temper flaring at the smallest things. He threw himself into chores, mending fences, oiling old saddles, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind off the past. But sometimes Emma caught him staring at the ridge, a look of longing and pain on his face. She knew he remembered the days when her mother rode Solace through those fields, laughter trailing behind her like wildflowers in the wind. The tension finally boiled over on a chilly Wednesday evening. The town council called a meeting at the old church, ostensibly about wildfire preparedness, but everyone knew what the real topic was. Emma and Jack sat near the back, the hard wooden pew pressing into Emma's spine. The church was packed, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Mayor Dawes opened the meeting with the usual talk about dry grass, fire breaks, and emergency plans, but it didn't take long for the conversation to turn. Mrs. Grant stood up first, voice trembling with righteous indignation. "That horse is a menace. My garden's ruined, my hens are terrified, and I hear it's been spotted near the school. What if one of the children gets hurt?" Others chimed in, voices overlapping, growing louder. "It broke my fence. It spooked my cows. We can't have a wild animal running loose. What if someone gets trampled?" Emma felt their words like stones, each one heavier than the last. She wanted to stand up, to tell them they were wrong, that Solace wasn't dangerous, that she was gentle and smart and misunderstood. But when she tried to speak, her voice caught in her throat. No one wanted to hear from the girl who talked to ghosts. Then, Jake Miller's father, Mr. Miller, stood up, red-faced and angry. "With all due respect, Jack, your family's got history with that horse. I say it's time we take care of it for good. Trap it, call animal control, whatever it takes. We can't wait for someone to get hurt." All eyes turned to Jack. Emma watched her father's face, saw the old grief rise up, mingling with guilt and fear. He cleared his throat, searching for words. "I understand everyone's concerns," he said finally, voice low and weary. "But that horse, it's not what you think. My wife, Emma's mother, she knew that animal better than anyone. She believed Solace was special, not cursed. I'm not saying we ignore the risks, but maybe there's another way." The room buzzed with disagreement. Mrs. Grant scoffed. Mr. Parker muttered under his breath. The mayor tried to regain order, but the mood had turned ugly. "We'll put it to a vote," she announced. "Trap the horse and call animal control, or—" She looked around, but no one offered another solution. The motion passed, overwhelmingly. As the meeting ended, Emma and Jack walked out in silence, the cold night air biting at their cheeks. Emma's heart pounded with fear and fury. "We can't let them do it, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "Solace doesn't deserve this." Jack hesitated, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "It's not that simple, Em. People are scared. Fear makes folks do things they wouldn't otherwise. Emma's eyes flashed. "You're scared too, aren't you?" Jack stopped walking, turning to face her. In the dim glow of the streetlight, he looked older than she'd ever seen him. Haunted by memories, by mistakes, by love he'd lost and couldn't let go. "I'm scared of losing you," he admitted quietly. "I couldn't protect your mother, and I can't lose you too. That's all." Emma swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, they walked home together, the silence between them deeper than ever. Over the next few days, Emma became a ghost herself, slipping through the town, keeping her head down, avoiding the eyes that watched her every move. She visited Solace only at dawn and dusk, moving quickly, listening for signs of trappers in the hills. She taught Solace new signals, practiced calming techniques, did everything she could to prepare for the worst. But the town's fear only grew. Someone put up hand-painted signs near the ridge. "Danger. Wild horse." Kids dared each other to go searching for the ghost and then ran home screaming at every snap of a twig. And through it all, Emma felt the pressure building, the sense that something big, something irreversible, was about to happen. One night, as Emma sat on the porch, watching the lightning flicker over the distant mountains, Jack joined her, settling into the old rocking chair. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind. Finally, Jack spoke. "I miss her too, he said softly. "Your mom. She saw things in that horse, in this place, that I never understood. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe we both should have." Emma blinked back tears. "I just want to do the right thing, Dad. For her, for Solace, for us." Jack nodded, looking out at the dark hills. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." Inside the house, the clock chimed midnight, the world holding its breath. Somewhere on the ridge, Solace lifted her head to the sky, sensing the change in the wind, the tension, the hope, the danger creeping ever closer. And in the darkness, the Callahan family faced the judgment of a fearful town, unsure of what the dawn would bring, but determined together not to let fear have the final word. It started with a smell, a sharp, acrid tang drifting across the fields on the wings of the late summer wind. Emma was in the barn, brushing out one of the older mares when she caught the first whiff. She paused, nostrils flaring, heart skipping. Within seconds, the world shifted. The wind grew hotter, restless. Overhead, the blue sky dulled, a strange amber haze creeping in. Somewhere in the hills, a jay called, shrill, alarmed. Then came the shouting. One of the ranch hands sprinted from the ridge, waving his hat. "Fire!" he yelled, voice cracking with panic. "Fire in the woods! Everybody out!" Yet Emma dropped her brush, rushing outside, heart pounding. The world beyond the barn glowed unnaturally, smoke spiraling up above the tree line, black and angry, spreading fast. The ranch erupted into chaos. Jack barked orders, his voice hoarse as he corralled the hands, shouting for hoses and water barrels. The neighbor's truck rumbled up the drive, Mrs. Parker clutching her little boy to her chest, face streaked with tears. The air buzzed with sirens as the volunteer fire crew tore past, red lights slashing through the smoke. Emma's eyes stung from the ash swirling around her. She pressed a sleeve to her nose, searching for any sign of Solace on the ridge. The wind shifted again, the fire's low roar rising, hungry, relentless. Then a new cry pierced the confusion. "Where's the calf? Somebody's missing a calf!" Panic ricocheted through the crowd. The Parkers' youngest steer, a timid brown calf named Pippin, was gone. He'd been grazing near the woods when the alarm was raised. Mrs. Parker's face went ashen. He's still out there? He'll be trapped?" Emma's gut twisted. She pictured the calf alone, terrified, somewhere in the burning woods. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single thought. "I have to help." But Jack grabbed her arm. "Stay here," he barked, his face streaked with soot and fear. "It's too dangerous." "I can help," Emma protested, voice breaking, but Jack wouldn't listen. He shoved a shovel into her hand. "If that fire jumps the creek, we're all in trouble. Focus, Em. Stay with the others." But even as she helped form a bucket brigade, Passing heavy pails from the well, to the garden, to the thirsty barn roof, her mind spun. She knew those woods better than anyone except her mother. And Solace. She knew the narrow game trails, the little hollows where a frightened animal might hide. She kept glancing at the ridge, searching for a flash of silver. The smoke thickened, orange and black and terrifying, and fear clawed at her throat. Then, through the haze, Emma saw her chance. While everyone's attention was on the western field, she slipped away, ducking beneath the fence and sprinting toward the woods. The heat hit her like a wall, thick and suffocating. She wrapped her shirt over her nose and pressed on, heart hammering, praying she wasn't already too late. The world inside the woods was a nightmare. Crackling branches, swirling embers, the distant scream of some startled animal. The fire raced ahead of her, leaping from tree to tree. Emma coughed, blinking away tears, stumbling through the undergrowth. She called for the calf, her voice hoarse. "Pippin, here, boy, where are you?" A branch crashed down, showering her in sparks. Panic flared. She was in over her head. Then, through the smoke, she heard something else, the frantic bleating of the lost calf. Emma spun toward the sound, pushing through burning brambles, ignoring the sting on her arms and legs. There, huddled in a hollow between two smoldering logs, was Pippin, shaking, eyes wide with terror. Emma dropped to her knees. "It's okay," she croaked, reaching for him, trying to soothe his panic. But Pippin wouldn't move, frozen by fear and smoke. Desperation surged through her. She glanced back, flames creeping closer, heat searing her face. If she waited, they'd both be trapped. She needed help, needed a miracle. That's when she heard it. The thunder of hoofs pounding through the inferno. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a trick of fear and hope. But then Solace burst into view, a silver streak against the smoke, mane and tail blazing in the firelight. The horse whinnied, wild and urgent, circling Emma and the calf, eyes fierce. Relief and awe flooded Emma. "Solace!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "Help us!" Solace stepped in, nudging Pippin gently with her nose, urging the calf to rise. Emma wrapped her arms around Pippin's neck, half pulling, half coaxing. The calf, trembling, finally staggered to its feet. Solace turned, looking straight at Emma. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the steady confidence that had once belonged to Emma's mother. Emma understood. Solace wanted her to follow. The horse moved forward, picking a narrow path through the burning trees, pausing to make sure Emma and Pippin kept up. The smoke thickened, the heat growing unbearable. Emma coughed, tears streaming down her face, vision blurring. She clung to Pippin, one hand buried in his fur, the other reaching for Solace's tail as a lifeline. Together, they moved. Solace in the lead, Emma and the calf stumbling behind. The fire roared on all sides, hungry and bright. But somehow, impossibly, Solace found the gaps, the safe spaces, always a step ahead of the danger. Emma lost all sense of time, all sense of herself. There was only survival, only movement. Finally, the smoke began to thin. The light brightened and the cool rush of night air swept over them. Emma stumbled from the woods into the clearing, collapsing to her knees, still clutching Pippin. Solace stood over them, sides heaving, eyes gentle and wise. In the distance, voices rose, shouts of relief, calls for help. The fire crew burst into the clearing, Jack at their heels. He froze when he saw Emma, his face crumpling with fear and then joy. "Emma!" he shouted, running to her, gathering her in his arms. "We got out!" Emma gasped, voice barely more than a whisper. "Solace?" "She showed us the way." Jack stared at the horse, wonder and gratitude warring with years of old fear. The townspeople gathered, silent, watching as Solace nudged the exhausted calf forward, then turned to Emma, her nose pressing gently into Emma's hair. For a long, suspended moment, no one spoke. The smoke drifted overhead, the woods still crackling with dying fire. And in the center of it all stood Emma and Solace, side by side, survivors against the odds. The world felt changed, smaller, closer, and somehow more possible than it had been Just hours before, as the first stars pricked the sky, Emma looked up at her father, eyes shining. "She's not a ghost," she whispered. "She's a hero." And though nobody cheered, nobody clapped, a new kind of understanding flickered in the air, quiet, uncertain, but real as the night wind itself. The night air outside the burning woods was thick with the scent of scorched earth, singed grass, and relief so sharp it felt like a new pain. Emma knelt in the dewy grass, chest heaving, as the world around her blurred and spun. Sirens echoed in the distance. People shouted and wept, and the moon, still pale through the haze, watched quietly over the chaos. Solace, her coat streaked with soot but still gleaming silver in the firelight, stood close, her flanks rising and falling in heavy, exhausted breaths. Pippin, the calf, stumbled and mooed softly, his big eyes rolling in terror, but he was alive, safe because of the horse everyone called cursed. A crowd quickly formed at the edge of the clearing, townspeople drawn by the spectacle of survival. Mrs. Parker rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her calf, crying tears of gratitude. The fire crew and neighbors clustered around, watching in disbelief as Solace, wild, wary, and proud, stood calmly by Emma's side, as if she belonged there. For a few moments there was only silence, a hush that seemed to stretch over the clearing, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Then the whispers began. "That's the ghost horse, ain't it?" someone muttered, voice trembling. "She led them out," said another, a note of awe breaking through. "No horse could do that. Not without thinking, not without meaning to help." Jack Callahan pushed through the crowd, face smeared with ash and worry, eyes searching. When he saw Emma, he ran to her, dropping to the ground and gathering her in his arms. Emma clung to him, finally letting the fear and exhaustion overwhelm her. She coughed, chest tight, and shivered in the night's chill. "I'm okay, Dad," she rasped. "Solace, she showed us the way. She saved us." Jack's arms tightened around her. For a moment he looked at Solace, something unreadable, grief, gratitude, awe, flashing in his eyes. "I saw him. I saw everything." Nearby, Mrs. Parker, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks, knelt beside Solace and Pippin. "That horse saved my baby," she whispered, stroking Solace's mane with trembling hands. "I don't care what anybody says. She's a blessing, not a curse." The townspeople, shaken by the fire and by what they'd witnessed, looked at one another uncertainly. The bravest among them stepped forward. First Sadie's father, then Mayor Dawes herself, who knelt to inspect the exhausted horse. "Never seen anything like it," the mayor said, voice soft. "It's almost human." Jake Miller, standing at the back of the crowd, scuffed his boot in the dirt. For once, he didn't have a snide remark. Instead, he watched Solace with a kind of nervous respect, jaw clenched, eyes wide. Meanwhile, the fire crews moved through the woods, stamping out the last embers. The danger was passing, but the night's events had left everyone rattled and changed. Volunteers offered blankets and water. Someone pressed a bottle into Emma's shaking hands. Jack draped his own coat over her shoulders, his touch gentler than it had been in months. Emma looked up at Solace, reaching a trembling hand to the horse's muzzle. Solace leaned in, snuffling gently at her hair, her breath warm and comforting. Emma closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. Relief, gratitude, and something like hope. People started to murmur again, this time without accusation. "Maybe she ain't bad luck after all. That horse is smarter than most folks. Did you see how she found them? Like she just knew." Emma saw Mrs. Grant, who had once demanded Solace's removal, standing at the edge of the group. She looked uncertain, caught between old fear and the new evidence of her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look angry, just bewildered, and as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. As Emma regained her breath, Jack brushed soot from her forehead. "You could have died out there," he said, voice rough, "but you didn't. You both came home." He turned to Solace, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly that only Emma and the horse could hear. The The paramedics wanted to take Emma to the clinic, but she insisted on walking. Supported by Jack, with Solace trailing close behind, she moved through the crowd, feeling the eyes of the whole town on her. Each step was a victory, not just over the fire, but over fear, over grief, over every whisper and rumor that had haunted her family since her mother's death. When they reached the ranch, the barn was crowded with people offering help and comfort. Emma collapsed onto a hay bale, legs shaking. Jack fetched a blanket and wrapped her up, then returned outside to help direct the fire crew and check on the other animals. Word spread quickly that Emma and the calf were safe, that the fire had been contained, and that Solace had been their unlikely savior. That night, after the barn quieted and the volunteers finally went home, Emma sat alone with Solace. The horse stood calmly in the straw, head lowered, her eyes soft and full of secrets. Emma spoke to her in the hush of midnight, telling her everything she'd held inside for months. She talked about her mother, about loneliness, about the fear that had gripped her heart since the day she died. "You brought me back," Emma whispered, pressing her forehead to Solace's. "You reminded me what it means to be brave." She didn't see Jack standing in the shadows, watching. She didn't know that he'd gone inside, found her mother's old letters, and read them for the first time in years. But when he finally entered the barn, he joined Emma beside the horse, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I was wrong, Em," he said quietly, "about a lot of things. Your mother, she saw something in Solace. I see it now, too." Emma smiled through her tears. She would have been proud, Dad. Of both of us." In the quiet that followed, Solace gave a low, contented nicker, settling into the straw as if she knew, somehow, that her place with this family was no longer in question. Across Edgewater, people lay awake, replaying the night's events, some still skeptical, some quietly amazed, all changed. The fire had passed, but something else had burned away. The old fears, the heavy judgments, the need to always have a villain. In its place grew the first fragile seeds of understanding, of trust, of hope for something new. And as the sky began to pale with the coming dawn, Emma, her father, and Solace rested together, no longer haunted, no longer alone, but bound by courage, compassion, and the power of second chances. The days after the fire moved like slow tides through Edgewater, each sunrise burning away a little more of the fear and suspicion that had long shadowed Emma's life. The blackened edges of the woods still smoldered, a reminder of how quickly the world could turn to ash. But amidst the scorched earth, wildflowers pressed bravely through the soil, and hope, so long a stranger here, began to take root again. The story of Solace's rescue swept through town like a prairie wind. Neighbors who'd once avoided the Callahan Ranch now dropped by with casseroles, pies, or just to hear the tale firsthand. Mrs. Parker and her little boy brought fresh apples for Solace, their gratitude shining through every shy smile and gentle pat. Even Mr. Miller, never one to change his mind easily, came by to mutter, "Heard you got some spirit, girl," before hurriedly walking away, cheeks red. But the biggest change was at home. The air between Emma and Jack had shifted, lighter, open in ways she'd almost forgotten were possible. One evening, a few days after the fire, Emma found her father sitting at the kitchen table, a battered stack of letters and photos spread out before him. He looked up as she entered, his eyes tired but softer. "I've been reading your mother's old notes," he said, tapping the pile. "She never gave up on Solace." "Not for a minute. I thought it was foolish, dangerous even. But now I wonder if maybe it was what kept her going." His hands trembled just a little as he lifted a faded photo. Emma's mother, smiling bright, her arm slung around Solace's strong neck. She believed Solace could teach us something, about forgiveness, about second chances. Emma sat across from him, her own hands fidgeting in her lap. "I always felt close to Mom when I was with Solace. Like maybe a piece of her was still out there, waiting for me. I didn't want to lose that, Dad. I didn't want to lose you, either. Jack's face cracked open with a sadness and a gentleness she hadn't seen in years. I'm sorry, Em, for shutting you out, for being too scared to see what you saw. His voice broke. You're braver than I ever was. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock, the quiet hum of the fridge. Then Jack reached across the table, covering Emma's hand with his own. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up. On Solace. On me. It felt like the moment she'd been waiting for all along, a reckoning, a reconnection. The sorrow between them, so heavy for so long, began to lift. The next morning, Jack walked out to the barn with Emma. Together, they brushed Solace's coat, working side by side in easy silence. Jack fed Solace an apple, chuckling as the horse snuffled his palm. Your mother would have loved to see this, he said. Maybe she's watching us right now, shaking her head at how stubborn I was. Word about Solace's heroism kept spreading. At the local store, people who used to cross the street now stopped Emma to ask how the horse was doing, to offer thanks, or simply to say they'd been wrong. The mayor dropped by with a town council invitation. Would Emma be willing to speak at the annual Edgewater Fair, to tell her story so everyone could hear it directly? Emma's first reaction was panic. Her mouth went dry, her mind racing. She'd always been shy, and public speaking was terrifying. But as she looked at Solace, grazing peacefully in the paddock, she remembered the night of the fire, the courage that had risen in her when she needed it most. Maybe this was what her mother had meant all along. That bravery wasn't about never being afraid, but about standing up when it mattered. Jack noticed her hesitation. You don't have to if you're not ready, he said gently. But if you want to, well, I think your mom would be proud. The news that Emma would speak at the fair spread through school faster than wildfire. Sadie found her in the hallway, squeezing her arm in excitement. You're going to be great, Em. And maybe this time, people will listen for the right reasons. At home, Emma prepared for her speech with her father's help. They pored over her mother's old notebook together, pulling out stories and lessons, even a few of her mother's favorite jokes about stubborn horses and stubborn people. Emma practiced her words out loud, sometimes in the barn where only Solace could hear, sometimes at a high kitchen table, Jack beaming with pride. On the morning of the fair, the whole town seemed to buzz with anticipation. Edgewater's Main Street was lined with bunting and booths selling homemade fudge, wildflower bouquets, and jars of honey. Kids darted between the games, and the air was thick with laughter and the smell of popcorn. Behind the stables, Emma brushed Solace until her coat gleamed, weaving a blue ribbon through her mane. A nod to the blue ribbon in her mother's bundle of letters. She took a deep breath, smoothing her dress, and led Solace out into the sunlight. The crowd fell quiet as they approached the stage. Jack walked beside her, placing a steady hand on her back. You're not alone, he murmured. Emma stepped up, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. She spoke about her mother's faith and Solace, about loss and loneliness, about the night of the fire and how Solace had become the town's hero. She ended with a lesson that her mother had written in the notebook, one she now truly understood. Sometimes the things we fear most are the things that save us in the end. All it takes is a little trust, a little courage, and a heart open to second chances. And when she finished, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't the old, cold silence of suspicion. It was thoughtful, reverent, full of hearts beginning to heal. Then, softly at first, applause rippled through the crowd, growing louder and warmer with each moment. Emma looked out and saw the faces of her neighbors, some tearful, some smiling, all changed. She felt Jack's hand squeeze her shoulder and Solace's warm breath at her ear. In that moment, she knew that she, too, had changed. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had learned, finally, to see the truth. After the fair, Emma stood in the late afternoon sun, Solace nuzzling her arm, Jack by her side. The wound of her mother's loss would always be there, but now it was tempered by something bright and fair. Belonging, forgiveness, and the love of a family, one that had found its way back together, just in time. The day of the Edgewater Fair dawned with the kind of golden light that made everything, barn roofs, fence posts, and faces, glow a little warmer. The sky was cloudless and blue, with a breeze carrying the scents of cottonwood and fry bread through the small Montana town. Emma woke before sunrise, heart fluttering in her chest like the ribbon tied in Solace's mane. Jack had already set out to help set up the fairgrounds. Emma found his note on the kitchen table, scrawled in hurried handwriting, "Proud of you, kid. See you at the ring." She smiled, touched by how far they'd both come, and made her way to the barn. Solace stood waiting, eyes gentle and wise, coat brushed to a luminous shine. Emma whispered a good morning and fastened a faded photograph, her mother beaming atop a much younger Solace, into a tiny saddlebag close to her heart. The town was already buzzing when Emma and Solace arrived. Booths overflowed with baked goods and homemade quilts. Children tugged at their parents, begging for rides or treats. Townsfolk who once avoided Emma now waved, nodding in greeting, eyes shining with something new. Respect, curiosity, maybe even affection. By the arena the crowd gathered, a hush settling as Emma and Solace took their place at the gate. The town council stood alongside, and even Mrs. Grant, who had once lobbied for Solace's removal, was there in her best Sunday dress. Jake Miller and his friends perched on the fence, eyes wide and faces uncharacteristically serious. Sadie waved from the stands, mouthing a nervous, "Good luck." Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the crowd, the eyes of the town, the echo of her mother's hope. She pressed her palm to Solace's neck, drawing strength from the horse's calm. When the announcer called her name, Emma led Solace into the ring, sunlight glinting on the silver strands of Solace's mane. For a heartbeat, all she heard was the hush. No jeers, no laughter, just the quiet rustle of anticipation. She began as her mother once had. A gentle touch, a spoken word, the softest of cues. Solace responded like a dream. She circled Emma with head bowed, followed at a signal, then stopped and bowed herself, as if acknowledging the crowd. Emma ran her fingers through the blue ribbon in Solace's mane, just as her mother used to do, and guided her through the old routine, the same gentle trick she'd learned from the battered notebook, turning on command, lowering her head for a hug, coming at the sound of a soft whistle. Each movement felt like an act of remembrance, a prayer for healing, a promise that the past wouldn't be lost. Emma's heart pounded with every trick, but her fear was gone. In its place was pride and something bigger, a sense that she was carrying her mother's spirit forward, that each careful, loving gesture was stitching their broken story back together. At the end, she paused, unfastened the saddlebag, and held up the photograph. "This was my mother," she said, her voice clear across the silent arena. "She loved this horse. She taught me that love is braver than fear, that sometimes the things we run from are the things that can save us. I think she'd be proud today to see us standing here together, still believing in second chances." For a moment there was only quiet, a deep, reverent silence that stretched through the stands. No one cheered, no one clapped, and yet, in that hush, something shifted. The last, stubborn edge of suspicion slipped away. Emma looked up, blinking back tears, and saw the mayor nodding, Mrs. Grant pressing a hand to her heart, and Jack wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Then, slowly, the applause began. Soft at first, then swelling, filling the space with warmth and wonder. Emma smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks, and buried her face in Solace's mane as the horse nickered gently, almost as if she understood. After the ceremony, townsfolk approached one by one, offering congratulations, apologies, and even a few cautious pats for Solace. Jake Miller, cheeks pink, handed Emma a single wildflower. "For the horse," he mumbled. Sadie threw her arms around Emma, laughing and crying at the same time. As the afternoon faded to gold, Jack found Emma by the old oak tree near the ring. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Your mom would have loved it today," he said quietly. "She would have been amazed by how brave you are, by how much you've grown." Emma pressed the photograph deeper into the saddlebag. "I hope she knows," she whispered, "that we're okay now." Hey, Jack squeezed her hand. "She knows, Em, and so do I." As dusk fell, Emma led Solace up the ridge one last time. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and lavender, the kind her mother used to love. She slid from Solace's back and placed the photograph carefully inside the saddlebag, resting it against Solace's heart. "She'd be proud of us," Emma whispered, tears falling freely now. Tears of joy, of release, of hope. Solace stood quietly beside her, ears flicking as the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of laughter and music from the fair below. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt whole, a patchwork of grief and love, old pain and new beginnings. The world was still full of challenges, she knew, but now she faced them not as a girl alone, but as someone who had found strength and empathy, courage and connection, and family, where she'd feared only emptiness. And as the first stars winked awake, Emma and Solace stood at the top of the ridge, two survivors, two healers, looking out over a town that had finally learned to believe in second chances. True strength is born in empathy, and healing sometimes gallops in on hooves. Don't let fear or old wounds blind you to loyalty, love, and second chances, even when they come in unexpected forms.